Okay, welcome to the Analyzation show. I'm here with a very talented writer, or Miami's Carrie Bradshaw, some would say, Asha Elias. Hi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I read your book, Pink Glass Houses, over the weekend. And, something just to jump right in, I'd like to know, tell me about your writing journey because you are a columnist, you've written a book. It's not an easy feat, any of those things.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've always known that I wanted to be a writer since I was, in elementary school and started falling in love with stories and storytelling. And it was always my path. I was always really focused on creative writing. And when I got to college, my parents told me that I had to graduate with a job. So I couldn't be an English major, basically, which would have been my first choice. So I majored in print journalism, which I loved. A different kind of storytelling, nonfiction, but still creative. And I went and worked in media for several years after graduating, but my dream was always to write a book. I never honed in on the story, though. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to tell. And I don't know if I had the confidence to sit with an idea for long enough to try to turn it into a book until 2020 and COVID quarantine, when we all kind of sat back and reassessed our passions and kind of thought about how much we felt like we were losing and what we were still missing out on in life. And this was that. This was the thing that I still hadn't pursued. And so that's when I sat down and started writing Pink Glass Houses.
And this story, I know it's been compared to Big Little Lies. I mean, it felt in that same world. And I mean, I'm a Big Little Lies fan, so that's a huge
Me
compliment
too.
as well. And I think there's something so fascinating about female dynamics. And as in your story, you have the parental side, but you also have the kid side. And I thought I would like to know, how universal do you think these dynamics are? Because you're really focused on Miami Beach and these elite kind of characters, these high status characters who have these extravagant parties, extravagant houses. But how universal do you feel like these female interactions are?
I love that question. Thank you for asking that. I think that they are completely universal. I think that you can find a Charlotte and a Melody for two of the main characters in my book in any different setting. They might dress differently, they might go to different parties, they might host kids' birthday parties differently, but the same kind of levels of competition and longing for acceptance exist, I think, within all female dynamics. And I think that in general, women are more communicative than men, which leads to sometimes stronger bonds and also sometimes more conflicts within relationships. And it's something that I really wanted to explore in this book, the positive side and the negative side. I think also as women, we have a really high capacity for acceptance and forgiveness. And we do sometimes let in people that we were unsure of. Those are dynamics that also exist a lot in Leanne Moriarty's books, who wrote Big Little Lies, who I also love and am such a huge fan of. But that's absolutely something I wanted to explore with a specific Miami flavor.
So that specific Miami flavor, it's fun because I love local books. I love local authors,
Me too.
because whether it's you're hearing about Lincoln Road or the Everglades, it's you're feeling connected to these stories in a deeper level. So I mean, I definitely encourage anyone who is local to Miami to try to seek out local authors like yourself because you do feel this familiarity that is you can't get from books where they're about New York or these other places. So you lived in Miami Beach, you live in Miami Beach. How true are these experiences to the reality?
I like to say that it's all fiction and that it's all real. No specific example or circumstance in this book was lifted from reality, but some of them are pretty close.
Okay.
And I really wanted to be authentic and that all of these things could absolutely happen here. I love Miami and I have a real passion for living here and raising my family here. And I think as someone who is in love with the city and plans to be here or for the duration of my life, I'm give myself license to also criticize some of like our less than desirable elements, which every city has, of course. And hopefully the love comes through in this book too. But some of the things, for example, that are kind of only in Miami are the extravagant birthday parties, which I've had friends who lived in Miami. And are you having your first child?
Yes, so that's the fun thing
Congratulations.
too. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm very pregnant right now. So I live in Miami Beach as well. So reading this book, I was like, "Huh, what do I have to buckle down for? Buckle up for rather? What do I have to get ready for?"
I think that there are like these pockets of time as an adult and as a woman where you like form bonds and friendships, and motherhood is a big one and a great one. And I think kind of like your village that you form as you're going through like the trenches of early motherhood, you tend to stay together for a really long time. And that's definitely been my experience. But things like the over the top birthday parties, that absolutely happens here. And we all kind of fall prey to it, even if we know better and we don't want to. I have a friend who raised her kids here up until early elementary school. And then she moved to Connecticut to a very well off neighborhood and threw a birthday party for her child, invited the neighbors, and they were horrified. Right? Just like the balloon sculptures and like, the elements of decor that are so natural to us here. Um,
Yeah, and they're so natural that I think that those elements transcend even economic class. I would say that everyone makes that happen somehow, whether it's on $100,000 budget like the
Mhm.
characters in this book, or whether it's on $200 budget. I think people all strive toward that, and it's amazing because you really see that come together as the universal standard. And living in Miami, you would think that that's just normal, but that's that's just what we're
Well,
used to.
absolutely. I think we're a very aesthetic community. We care a lot about how we present ourselves physically. And I think the same goes for when we're hosting. We, as a community, like things to look very put together, very thematic. And when it comes to kids' party, I feel it parties, everything is even elevated.
Yeah. I think what something that's interesting too that you touch upon in your book is that because you have this dynamic of parents and kids kind of hand in hand, um, and you see kind of differing dynamics, but also the same. And I think that often you have the main characters reflecting on like, oh, this feels like we're little girls in school, but the
Mhm.
little kids are a lot more civil with each other.
Yeah.
What do you think? Being someone who you grew up in Boca, is that correct? If I read your bio? So I grew up
Yeah.
in West Broward. I kinda know
It's
that
similar.
life of the suburbs.
Right.
And then going through it as a child and then as an adult, through those dynamics, what do you think changes that kind of, that innocence that leaves from the kids that makes the stakes so much more serious for the adult?
Yeah, stakes do seem to get higher. I think a couple things happen. I think that kids are oftentimes more resilient than us as adults, and they are more they're quicker to their emotions, but they get over them quicker too. So, my 11-year-old daughter can have a fight with her best friend and be devastated, and the next day be perfectly fine and everything is forgiven. And they can go through those cycles, and it's wonderful because it's how they're learning to interact with the world as they mature. And I think we lose a little bit of that as adults. And something else that I was really interested in exploring is we're really the first generation of women, or maybe early second generation of women who were raised to have careers first and kids second. And so we were programmed to be a little more competitive, to chase careers, to achieve. And then when we pivot that, whether we continue working or not, into parenthood, I think we're bringing a lot of that energy to mothering. And I think that it makes the experience more competitive than it has been for past generations. I've had people ask me if what this book would have looked like when I was a child. And I said, my parents didn't even know when PTA meetings were. It wasn't a huge priority for them. And we, um, at least in this Miami Beach, really tight knit community, most of us are helicopter parents and really overly involved. And so the mothers who don't have time to be helicopter parents have this inherent sense of guilt. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes from.
Something I really loved, I mean, this was a very character-driven book, and something that I really enjoyed while going through this is, just in my everyday, I'm someone who I grew up in all sorts of dynamics of the suburbs. I was in a sorority, you go through all these girl groups. And sometimes you hear people talking about each other or things that have happened. And you really try to, I mean, I think I could pin this on you having this characteristic as well of trying to empath and trying to understand, put yourself in the mindset of the other person.
Mhm.
Which I think for me has helped to try to understand the decisions of other people around me. But I love that this book really puts it into the perspective of each individual character because there are these misunderstandings that happen and there's no one who's so innocent. I mean, even every single person thinks that they are doing their best. And I think that that's so true of women and parents in general is that you think you're doing your best, but someone else is judging you and they don't even know
Mm.
what you're going through.
Yeah, that is
What
so
would
that.
so tell me a little bit about that stylistic choice. I mean, I thought it was an interesting way of putting it through instead of having it just through one narrator, instead of having it through Melody, the newcomer, or just Charlotte, or, putting it through all these different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I wanted to find myself. I wanted to find compassion with each of these characters. I didn't want there to be a clear villain and a clear hero, and I didn't want anyone to be perfect or anyone to be terrible. And so I one of the reasons that I chose multi POV is because it's exactly what you said, and it goes to the title of the book, Pink Glass Houses, where everyone's throwing stones and everyone is making assumptions about the other characters, and I wanted them to almost always be wrong. Each character in the book is struggling, and each one is fighting their own private battles, and no one really understands what's going on behind closed doors. And I think that's true for us as women in general. And I wanted the gossip to be a big part of the book. And I really wanted it to be false.
I, it was so refreshing and satisfying when it was false. Yeah, I don't know why, because it's these things where you would then see it be so wrong, and it's just again goes to prove kind of the fallacies of these different characters. But they're all such hardworking women as well. So you in your own personal journey, you were working at Ocean Drive magazine, and if I read correctly, you then, became a full-time mom. What was that journey like? And, did you work through some of was it a little bit therapeutic writing some of these characters that could be a little bit judgy of stay-at-home moms or moms that weren't in their careers, any longer?
Absolutely. I think that this whole book was catharsis, honestly, because I wrote it at a time when I was very, very deep into into the philanthropic community of Miami, and also I was the vice president of fundraising for my daughter's PTA at the
Oh,
time. So
wow.
I was living Charlotte's trajectory in a lot of ways, and I felt this huge pressure to give back and to support and to dedicate all of my time and energy to my kids and my community. And I felt that I was lacking as a result. And I think that was the spark that made me want to write this book, is that I saw so many women who were dedicating themselves really fully to their kids and their community, but it was draining them and causing a lot of conflicts in their social dynamics.
So you are very active in your community, and just as Charlotte was and all these other characters are. What was the reaction like from the community once this book was published?
There was really a myriad of really funny and mostly positive reactions, I will say. So
That's good.
the book was announced 2 years before publication. And so word started getting out, and all of the promo materials accurately portrayed it as like a pretty gossipy, juicy story. And so people in the community would approach me and ask me all the time if they were in it. And no one, I didn't write anyone into a character. These characters are all composites of different personality types and really are their own people with their own lives. But it was funny how many people came up to me and were like, "Who am I in the book? Which one am I?" And then once the book came out, I was curious if people would attach themselves to a character, and was kind of relieved that universally people were like, "Oh, these characters are their own people." One person said, "Oh, all of these characters are pieces of your personality, meaning mine." And I thought that was really smart and very true. I think that I have a little bit of the cynic of Darcy. I still feel like an outsider and a newcomer like Melody. And I'm also the go getter fundraiser like Charlotte, who wants to try to make everything perfect. So I think that was the most interesting piece of feedback that I didn't even realize I was doing.
And so, what has changed in your perspective since writing this book? It's been a couple years. I know you're working on another book. How has your perspective shifted? I mean, life has happened, right? So, where are you at now?
I'm a completely different person than who I was when I wrote this book, but in a really refreshing way when I can look at it and be like, wow, that's where I was then. And I'm not there anymore. But I'm so glad I kind of had this time capsule of all of these topics that I was thinking about and kind of obsessed with at the moment. And like I said before, it really was kind of catharsis in my own kind of processing that very specific life stage. Now my new book is called The Namaste Club, and it's also a satire. So meant to be lighthearted, but and about the wellness community, but also kind of scooping together everything that's happening in Florida right now, from book bans to invasive species and, everything else that's been on my mind over the next year. It really is a departure from pink glass houses in a lot of ways, but representative of who I am today as a writer.
It's a departure, but it's also I can see this common thread because if I were to walk outside right now, Miami Beach, everyone would be in yoga pants, coming from a workout class that somehow in the middle of the workday. So
True.
I feel that there is a thread. So it's funny. There's this one line that that's at toward the end of the book, and I don't think it spoils too much, but it's the city will move on to a shiny new glamorous person, and on the wheel will spin. Tell me about, what the Miami wheel really is. I mean, what is, because there are certain things that when I was reading this book and you wrote it at a certain time, and there have been multitudes of different versions of these stories that have actually kind of paralleled freakishly some of the things in this book. And what is that cycle of Miami that makes this place this character of its own?
I will say that I think it stems from a really beautiful place where Miami is the most welcoming and accepting big city. And maybe not everyone would agree with that offhand, but I don't know another quote unquote major American city where anyone can come without a name, without a pedigree, work hard, and do what they want to do. Even becoming a published writer. I don't know that I could have broken into New York or LA, the way that I was able to in Miami, and not only just getting a book deal, but having truly the support of the Miami literary community. Um, but the flip side of that coin is that sometimes we let in people who maybe don't have the best of intentions, and we give them a chance. And oftentimes that presents as a very successful seeming business person who wants to throw a lot of money and put their names on buildings and sponsor events. And then it turns out that all of their money was made illegally and they end up in jail. And that is a story that has happened time and time and again here. And to me, that's the wheel, is that we always let people in. We give them a chance, whether they're going to try to succeed or, do something shady and end up hurting the community. And then other part of the wheel, I think, is that people come here, and I'm sure you've seen it too. We're a very transient city. People are moving here all the time. And almost never does someone move here and say, wow, I love it here. It feels like home. People come here and they criticize it and compare it to wherever they came from. And the food there was better and the culture there was better. And then all of a sudden, little by little, and this is what I tried to do with the Melody character, the transformation happens and they turn into Miami. And all of a sudden, within 4 or 5 years, they are living the lifestyle that they criticized when they moved here.
Yeah, you see it. I think it kind of even spans beyond Miami in a ways, just in South Florida in general, because this is just such a transplant region. And you do have people from New York or New Jersey or wherever saying, "Oh, this is better." But then they all they all become a part of the river that flows that
Yeah, they
is
drink
South
Kool-Aid.
Florida. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what it was like, because since I am entering this phase of motherhood, um,
Yeah,
you know,
the
being
beautiful things.
yeah, being like a stay-at-home mom and because I think that it's such a hard decision to make to step away from your career. And now you didn't have the crystal ball at the time, but I mean, what a career you have now. And it's so incredible between your column, between this book, between the next book you're writing. Um, what was that period of time like? That decision like? And then, we'll talk now about the crystal ball that is today.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think, it's not for everyone, stepping away from career. And I think that stepping away from something that has been so fulfilling and such a big part of your identity is really difficult and destabilizing. And motherhood is also such a huge transition. So it can be a lot at once. It worked really well for me because I felt like I was at the end of that cycle. I loved working at Ocean Drive and it worked for me for many, many years. But at the time that I was having my first child, I kind of knew that I had reached the end of that chapter. And I'm so lucky that I was able to immerse myself into just motherhood for a few years. I've noticed with um, my friends who have stayed in their careers, of course, it's difficult. It's a lot to balance, but their sense of fulfillment never wavered because they had, all of their buckets full. And with my friends who became stay-at-home moms, that kind of wavers because you do kind of question, not everyone, and have so much respect for anyone who doesn't go through this, but I do know a lot of women who, as their kids become older and more independent, more self-sufficient, and are in school all day, start to feel a little bit like they're not living up to their potential. And I've met so many women who have found incredible second acts and really creative pursuits kind of during that time. It's right around when the kids get to like second, third grade and they're not really babies anymore and they're busy. And I have one friend who started a beautiful gifting business. I have another friend who started a successful blog. And it seems to be around the time that some women kind of step back and say, okay, like now I'm ready to do something for myself again. And that's what it was for me too.
So tell me about your second act. We've spoken a lot about the book, but you also have this column called Vice City Pillow Talk with Miami New Times. And it's funny because was, when I was reading the book, I looked at your name and I go, this seems very familiar. And then I put two and two together that you're also the columnist behind that column. So tell me a little bit about your second act and where we are today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Once I started writing again, I think the floodgates just opened and I started thinking about all the other things that I wanted to do. And freelancing what and personal essays was a big part of that. I had an idea to write a column about dating a younger man, which is another space that I'm in right now. And I wrote an essay, I sold it to Cosmopolitan, and I was like, "Wow, that was really exciting and fulfilling." And so then I reached out to Miami New Times because they were doing a call for writers, and I asked if they need anything, and they offered me a column, which is like a dream come true, and I still can't believe that, I just kind of felt like a gift from the universe, and I said yes. So it's a sex and dating and relationships column where I write about what it's like dating and being in relationships in Miami. And it's not only my personal experiences, but I interview people and I seek out unique stories from the community. So it's really combining so many things that I love being in Miami with, writing about people. So it's been so much fun. And I really feel like I'm living my dream right now.
So you're writing this column, you're now writing your second book. What advice do you have for other writers out there? I think the trajectory that you had of going to journalism school, getting into a job that, it's a job, but maybe it isn't always the thing you've dreamed of, or,
Yeah.
it's not you feel like there's something more out there. What is your advice to those writers and creatives, but specifically writers, who may be in a similar boat as you were a couple of years ago before you got to where you are today?
I think that the most important thing for writers is to find their voice and that could be hard to hone in on. And for me, it was about letting go of all the fears I had about being judged. Um, because writing authentically will make you vulnerable. And being okay with being uncomfortable is really important. I think to like finding what you're supposed to be writing and like to be writing authentically. And then once you're kind of there and you're ready to face that fear, then you have to be ready for lots of rejection and failure because nobody gets it on the first or second or third try. And in my experience, the first hurdle to leap when getting a book deal is signing with a literary agent because in traditional publishing, publishers don't speak directly with authors. They work through literary agents. And there are a really finite amount of literary agents for a lot of writers who want to be published. And so that process is extremely daunting and full of rejection and full of it can be incredibly deflating. And I had plenty of no's before I got to a yes and could have given up several times. And I think just like a stubborn belief in yourself is what you need to get to the next step because nobody gets it quickly.
So now that you're writing this next book, do you have what do you feel like you have now in the wisdom of a writer in your toolbox?
Mm.
Whether it's confidence, whether it's just even more perspective or more practical tips than you did with the first book.
Mhm. I think the most important thing I have in my toolbox is other writers who I trust, who I can share work with, and who can tell me what isn't working. it is truly the most valuable thing for a writer because a book like Pink Glass Houses went through maybe 10 rewrites from first draft to publication. A similar trajectory with my second book. In each I rewrite, I want to say 3 or 4 times. A first draft is always messy. It's never perfect. And there's only so much you can edit yourself. So having a cohort of writers, which you can find through online workshops, Miami Book Fair is great at putting writers together, Books and Books, Coral Gables has writing groups. So attending those and finding writers who are willing to read your work and criticize it is the biggest gift for a writer.
So, Asha, you are such an interesting person. I think there's a lot left to be desired in this conversation, and people will get a lot more of you in the Miami Book Fair coming up. Where can people follow you so they can find out how they can see you speaking about this book, and where can they get Pink Glass Houses?
You can follow me on Instagram asha.sue.elias. And I'm very open to direct messages and happy to respond to anyone. I will be presenting on 2 different panels at Miami Book Fair. You can refer to Miami Book Fair's online schedule for more information. And my book, Pink Glass Houses, is available wherever books are sold, from Books and Books Coral Gables to Amazon to Barnes and Nobles and other online outlets.
Lasha, thank you so much. I hope that when the next book comes out, perhaps I won't be pregnant and we can have this conversation in person over a glass of wine. But
I would love
I'm
that.
I'm so thrilled that we got to speak, and please keep doing all that you're doing because we need authentic Miami stories, and you're definitely a great source of that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.